Hey, and welcome to another Every Tuesday video. In last week's video I shared how I show logo options to a client, and in this week's video I'm going to show you once the client has chosen and approved the logo that you provided them, this is how you create the different file formats for print and for web, for final, handoff, and so you can get paid. So we're just going to walk through them as quick as I can because there's a lot of them. So CMYK, this is for print, and I usually supply a full color. So you've got your Illustrator AI file and an EPS file, which is another version of a vector file. And I always save this down so it's compatible with versions of Illustrator CS3 or newer. So if you're working on Creative Cloud and you want to hand off a file to someone, that way they don't freak out if they can't open the file if they're on CS4. I'll show you exactly how to do that. And I usually always bring it back to at least CS3 because a lot of changes were made in CS3, so that's usually a safe bet to save down to. I also have a tutorial on that too if you want to check it out more thoroughly than what we'll go over here. And then I also supply for limited color applications. I usually supply a black and a white version. No need to really go over this. You just change the color to black and change it to white, which you can't see here, but if you open the file you could. All right, so CMYK, full color version, RGB. This is for just web applications. So we've got a GIF, a JPEG, and a PNG. Typically you only need a JPEG or a PNG, but I think this client specifically requested a GIF file, which is why that's in here. So JPEG usually suffices. This gives you the logo and it's got a white square around it because JPEGs you can't save with a transparent background, but PNGs you can. So I always supply a PNG in case the person has a website that has a color that isn't white. This way this logo can sit right on top of that color and you don't have this ugly white box around it. And then finally a spot color. This is where Pantones come into play. If you're familiar with Pantones at all, you know that that is basically the universal color system because everybody's home printers, laser printers, they all print color differently. And this is a way to control the look of the color. So if you're using a professional printer, this is the type of file that you would want to supply if you're doing like letter pressing or any type of specialty printing. That way the printer knows and you know the exact color to expect when the job is finished. So I'll show you how I selected those colors and then how to save those colors as a spot file. And yeah, oh, the other thing I want to say is spot. Whenever you hear the word spot, it just means Pantone. They're interchangeable words. Spot's just shorter, so we'll use that. Okay, so CMYK file, I'm just going to show you what this looks like. This is where you make sure, if I hit Y on my keyboard, I can select all of the red, and this just makes sure that all of my red, this should be a CMYK over here. You can see it by toggling this little icon down and selecting CMYK. You can see that all of these colors are the same. Same with the blue. You want to make sure you don't have any blank spaces because if this wasn't showing a number, it means that this item and this item have different color builds. So you want to make sure your color builds are right there. And then when you go to save your file, you're going to go File, Save As. I'm just going to pretend like I'm saving over it. And this is where you always get this little pop-up here. And this is where you save it down to Illustrator CS3. So that's where you want to do that. So just make sure you do that. Same with saving an EPS file. So if I go File, Save As, and I change this down here to an EPS, I hit Save, pretend like I'm replacing the one I have, you'll get the exact same window show up and just select CS3 right there. So now you've got all of your CMYK files all set. We'll move on to our spot color file. You can see the reds and the blues are definitely looking different on screen, which is totally expected and totally fine. You should never expect Pantone colors to show up on screen the way they look in your Pantone Fandex or swatch book, this little guy. So this is what you use to find the color that you need, and it tells you on each chip in here what the build is and what the Pantone color is. And you can tell, like if you choose this orange color right here, that's the exact orange that you should expect from your printer when you hand off a spot file. So over here you can see too that I've named my files to correspond with the color builds that they have. So this is my spot file, and I'll show you if I select my red, you can see all of my red is the same. and all of my blue is the same. Now if I wanted to change my red with it selected, I can go over here into my swatch palette. If you don't see your swatch palette, you can get to it by going Window, Swatches, and it'll show up. So if I want to open up my color library, I can toggle this little icon down, open swatch library, color books, and then you can choose from Pantone solid, coated, or uncoated. The coated and the uncoated means the type of paper that you'll be printing on. So most commonly it's coated paper, but especially with letterpress, that's uncoated paper. So you want to make sure you're looking at the correct swatch book for your Pantones, because each Pantone swatch book is different. So the example that I just showed you was for coated paper only, and then this would be uncoated, and not always, it's not always the case that the colors match up. So for this example, we're using solid coated, and once I click that, you'll see all these colors show up. And because I looked at a real swatch book before, this guy, you can see it says solid coated right there. I can come in here and I know that my red color is 1788, and the, whoops, I typed it in wrong, 1788. And you can see with the C right here, that means coated. If I were in the uncoated swatch palette right here, this would say uncoated and this would end in a U instead of a C. And you can see it's right here. It's kind of lame how they show it to you. It's really hard to find sometimes, but you just look for the one with the white border around it, and that's my color. And you just want to make sure, like if I changed it to a couple of those colors and then I decided to come back to the red, now when I hand this file off to my printer, I want to make sure that my swatch palette is cleaned up. That way my printer doesn't get confused about what color I'm actually using. So you can clean up your swatch palette by toggling the switch down, or this icon down again, and selecting select all unused, and you'll see it selects these two, and then I can just drag them to the trash. So now when I hand off my file to the printer, they know that these are the only two colors that I'm using for this. And when you're letterpressing or when you're printing anything with spot colors, you get charged by the number of colors you have. So it's very important to always make sure you clean up this palette here. Okay, so we've got our spot colors and we've got our CMYK colors, and now we need to make a file for RGB. So these files will be used on the web only, and I usually use my CMYK file, and I go over here and I go File, Document Color Mode, and I change it to RGB. So now these are CMYK colors living in an RGB environment, which don't always directly interpret, because sometimes your RGB colors are more vibrant, or you want them to be more vibrant than your CMYK values. So this is your opportunity to change just the RGB values so they appear a little brighter on screen than you see right here. So if I select all of my red again, I'm hitting Y on my keyboard and then I'm clicking the red. If I come over here to my color palette, and once again you can get to your color palette by going Window, Color. And I'm going to toggle this icon down because now we're working in RGB. So I'm going to click RGB, and this is all right, except I'm going to change this one to 61, whoops, 61, and then this one to 70. So this one was pretty similar, but it's not always the case. So just please keep that in mind. This is your opportunity where you can make it more vibrant if you want. And I'm just going to change this one to 149 and 215. So it's just slightly different. So now we're going to come over here and you're going to go File and Save for Web. Illustrator actually has a Save for Web feature, so this is what we're going to use to save our web-ready files. So click on Save for Web, and you'll get this dialog box that'll come up, and over here is where you select the different file type that you want. So like we talked about earlier, GIF isn't always necessary to provide your client, but I would recommend always giving a JPEG and a transparent PNG. So if we go over to JPEG, by default the quality will be set to 60%, and I always like bumping it up to 65%. It just helps make any edges that might be a little fuzzy cleared up. And I also like carrying the size over of 600 pixels. And there we go. So that way when a developer gets this, he can always shrink it down and it still maintains really good quality if it needs to be used at a larger size. So once you have that, you can click Save, and then you can select what you're going to save it as. And next, let me just cancel this. So you already saved your JPEG and now you need to save your transparent PNG. So you'll just do the same exact thing over again. You'll go File, Save for Web. And over here, you'll drop this down and select PNG 24. I like using PNG 24 because it just makes my edges a little crisper. So I stick with that. And you want to make sure transparency is checked, because if you don't check it, it'll behave just like a JPEG and you'll get this white box around it. So check transparency, and once again, I'm going to input the size of 600 pixels. Okay. Whoops, 600. Okay, so then you'll just save this again and you'll be all set, and you'll have all of your RGB files, your CMYK files, and your spot color files ready to go. And one last thing that I wanted to mention is why I create logos, and a lot of people create logos in Illustrator. The reason is Illustrator is a vector-based program where, in other words, it works off of points instead of pixels like Photoshop does. And points can be scaled infinitely, which means you can design a logo at super, super tiny, and you can scale it up. Like if it needs to go on a billboard, you can scale it up all the way to that size and you won't lose any quality in the process. If you create it in Photoshop and you start out small and you scale it up, you're gonna lose a lot of resolution. Things are gonna look pixelated and it's gonna look like you don't know what you're doing. So you don't want that. But if you do decide to design a logo in Photoshop, you have to make sure that you design the logo at the largest possible size that it will be used at, so it maintains its best possible quality, which means a lot of the times you're going to have really large files that you're dealing with. And if you just want to avoid the stress altogether, I would suggest sticking with Illustrator. So that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, and I will see you next time.